Well, hello everybody, and thank you so much for tuning into FunAhead TV. Today we are finally getting started on our springtime Porsche projects that I mentioned in the previous video that I made, introducing all of the projects that we're going to be doing. What I failed to mention actually in that last video was that there is actually another little mystery project that I haven't told you guys about yet. It may or may not involve converting this Carrera 4 into a Carrera 2. Anyway, I'm still undecided on that particular note, but we'll talk more about that later. For today, what we need to do is gonna go ahead and get started on this guy. Because we're doing multiple projects at one time and it might involve waiting for some parts, we're going to go ahead and prepare for the transmission first and foremost to get that out, but at the same time, in the process of removing everything to get the transmission out, I'm going to go ahead and take the front bumper off so that once we do eventually get the transmission out and we're waiting on the synchros, etc., I'll have everything up here all exposed and we can do the radiators while we're waiting on parts. So that's exciting. But those are kind of the first two projects that we're going to go ahead and tackle. The transmission being, of course, the biggest one of those, and then the radiators while we're waiting on parts for that. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and take all the undercovers off and get everything exposed for the transmission back there. I don't know why I keep pointing up towards the front of the car. And then we're going to take the front bumper off, and that will give us good access to the bumper area and front differential area, wink wink, and then we'll go from there. Well, here we are. I'll just show you guys this real quick in case you've never seen how a front bumper comes off. Front bumper wise, actually it's extremely easy. This is one of the most simple bumpers to take off of any, call it modern car. There's actually no clips, nothing. Every bumper, every modern bumper nowadays has a bunch of like snap clips all up and around here, and you got to pull them and they break half the time. Anyway, this one, all it is a bunch of screws. There's a screw on either side hidden behind the marker light on the side. There's two up top here, and then there's several along the bottom. That is all that holds this entire bumper in. It's pretty nuts. Of course, to get access to the screws in the back side of the marker, you have to take the headlights out. But I don't know if you've ever taken the headlights out of a Porsche before. They're the easiest things ever. There's a little wrench inside of the toolkit, and you just got to stick it in the hole that's right here. That actuates this little bar, and then the headlights literally just like pop out. You can see how the coolant system or the cooling system on a 911 is designed. There are two radiators, one on either side of the car. They've got these pretty crazy looking cooling ducts. The radiators kind of sit sideways, as you can see. It's actually, you can't really see all that well, but anyway, they sit sideways on either side, and they've got these ducts that direct air back towards the radiator. Pretty cool design, honestly, but the con of all this is that you can imagine as you drive down the road, these ducts catch all sorts of stuff. So I actually took each of the ducts off a couple years ago to clean out everything back in there. Actually found a freaking bird. I found all sorts of stuff, and then all sorts of dirt and debris gets packed in between the AC condenser and the radiator on either side. So lots of potential for leaves and little pebbles and whatever, birds, to get caught up in there and just sort of remain there until they completely deteriorate and then clog up your radiator fins. That's what this looks like. So obviously we'll be removing all of this to gain access to, here's the side of the radiator here. We're going to gain access to that and then remove the stock radiators. We're also going to have to we're probably going to have to take this wheel well out. Actually, I'm certain we're going to have to take that wheel well out to gain access to the coolant hoses that go into the radiator, which are those right there. So, but like I said, we have the undercovers off and we can begin preparations for getting the transmission out of the vehicle now. Alrighty, now speaking of the transmission, I'll give you guys a quick overview of what all it takes to remove the transmission out of a 996 and 997 911. So I've dropped this stabilizer bar really quick because I'm preparing to be able to stabilize the engine once we drop the transmission. I will explain more about that in a second. But you can see here's the transmission. Basically, there is one transmission mount up in the front here, and then the rest of it is held on by the bell housing bolts. A few things to disconnect. Obviously, the mount itself, the bell housing bolts, the half shaft bolts, the CV shaft bolts need to come out. The shifter cables, which come right here, and then there is a reverse switch, which is right here. That's all of it. Obviously, you have to remove this bar because the transmission is going to have to swing down. It's actually a very simple transmission to work on and remove, but there is a caveat, and that is the entire powertrain is held up by 3 mounts. That one transmission mount that I mentioned, which is right here, and then there are 2 engine mounts, one on either side of the engine. So naturally, as you can imagine, when you drop this transmission mount, the whole powertrain can swing down. So you have to be very, very intentional, very careful about supporting both the engine and the transmission as you're removing this from the car. Porsche makes a special factory tool that bolts onto this cross member that holds your engine up when you remove the transmission. I have a pretty janky countermeasure for that, which I will show you guys in a little bit. But that attaches right here, and that will keep the engine supported. That's part of the reason why actually I took the bumper off beforehand, because I didn't want to be raising and lowering the car a bunch once the transmission's off. I'm going to put the engine on a transmission jack and leave the car just set kind of lower once the transmission's out of the car. I will shut up now, and we can go ahead and start getting to work on doing this. Okay, now, as you can see, transmission is behind me back there. But while we're under here, I actually wanted to kind of derail a little bit and get started on a slightly different project. And I'd kind of teased it earlier in the video, and that is removing this guy right here, which is the front differential. Part of my goal here, as I had kind of mentioned earlier, I want to have the engine and everything secured once the transmission's out, so that while I'm waiting on parts, I can be doing the coolant system stuff up at the front, and there's no issue there. I don't have to wait on doing any other projects while we're waiting on transmission parts once it's out of the car. Given that this other project has been kind of creeping up in my mind of removing the front differential, I kind of wanted to go ahead and tackle that while I'm standing here and before the transmission actually comes out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Before we do that, let me explain some of the reasons why I'm going to do that. Reason number one, and kind of the main reason, of course, a lot of what we're doing is to get this car ready for track prep. Now, of course, the Carrera 4 is an awesome vehicle, great powertrain, awesome four-wheel drive system, and it really helps the 911 just be a great everyday driver. It helps it out in the rain. If you do find yourself in snow, it will, of course, help with that immensely. But as a track car, it's not the greatest. Of course, this differential is massive. You can see here, that's the very front of it, and it goes all the way back to here. So it's, I don't know, call it 3 feet long, maybe. And I believe it weighs in the order of, I've seen online, 52 kilos. So that's, I call it 110 pounds. It's 110 pounds. Plus the CV shafts at the front. You have a lot of extra weight, and you've got a lot of extra just spinning inertia. So of course, the same power engine that drives the Carrera 2 back here, where it's just driving two-wheel drive, is now driving 2 additional wheels, having to spin up that much more stuff. Plus you have the weight of the powertrain, same horsepower, having to push along, and that's that much more weight. And then your front end, of course, impacts turn in to some extent. You've got an extra 110 pounds hanging out on the front end. Your front tires have to turn that in. Actually, this system is very simplistic. It's just a viscous clutch system. So what happens is, when there is a difference in speed in the front wheels and the rear wheels, of course, you have some slippage in that viscous clutch whenever there is slippage of the rear wheels. So basically, if the rear wheels are spinning faster than the front, The viscous clutch will help drive the front wheels and then help give you traction from all 4 wheels. So there is nothing computerized about it. The engine actually has, or the ECU actually, or DME as Porsche people would say, the DME has no idea that the differential is even there. There's nothing electronic connected to it whatsoever. The only thing that is electronic is that the wheel speed sensor encoders, or what's the word I'm trying to think of, the pickup points on the that spin past the wheel speed sensor for the VSA are located on the CV shaft. So this part right here of the CV shaft actually is the only part that will have to remain on the car of all of this front wheel drive system, because it contains the what is the freaking word I'm thinking of? Encoder, the thing that the wheel speed sensor actually reads. Help me out in the comments, please. What is the word I'm trying to think of? Anyway, so that will involve us, deconstructing the CV shafts a little bit, and by a little bit I mean completely, to make it so that the inside or the wheel side of the CV shaft remains in place. However, that does lead me into my next point of front wheel drive maintenance. Now, given that this car is a 2001 model year car with higher mileage, I have noticed that the seals on the differential, the front differential, are starting to leak. The output shaft, or the output seals for either CV, I don't know if I'm pointing at it, hard to tell with this lighting probably, but either side is seeping a little bit of oil. In addition to that, the boots for each of the CV shafts, both the inner and outer boots of both CV shafts, front CV shafts, are cracking and aging and going bad. Needless to say, the front differential and 4-wheel drive system in general, all-wheel drive system, is going to need some maintenance soon in the form of seals and new CV shaft boots. Now that's a pain in the butt. Could we do it? Yes, absolutely. But we kind of have this motivation of wanting to make this car a little bit more trackable. Why not remove it all? Now, of course, in the event that we want to put it back in, we'll still have the front differential sitting around. We'll still have the drive shaft, the prop shaft going to the front, sitting around. And then all I would have to do then is buy new CV shafts. Now, of course, that's a pain, and I have to buy, brand new CV shafts. But that's the only thing that we would have to do to put all this back in the car in the event that we would want to do so. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I want to make this car more track focused, of course. So we want to go weight down and inertia down, and the all-wheel drive system needs some maintenance anyway. So why not just get it out of the way, at least for a couple of years, until I end up deciding that maybe I want the all-wheel drive system back in the car for some reason. I don't know why I really ever would. So I am going to go ahead and shut up now. What I'm going to do is begin by taking all of this stuff out. Begin by doing the entire project. I don't know why. I cannot say words today, I'll tell you what. Well, here it is. As you just saw, we got the front diff out. I mean, look how massive this thing is. It is so long. Like, there's the rest of the car. Like, no joke, the thing goes like past the freaking shifter inside the car. It's so huge. It really was not bad at all. The hardest part is that the CV shafts, they don't compress like a lot of CV shafts at the joints. I was not able to get them up and around the cups to get them out. So that was a bit of a pain. I actually, I had to kind of drop the diff a little bit and scoot it forward and back, and to kind of get the convex part of the CV shafts to come up and out of the concave portion of the diff. I mean, super easy job. No joke, this whole thing probably took me 30 minutes. Let's talk about whether or not this is worth it. As of right now, I'm kind of questioning that. Like, I could probably pick this thing up with one hand. Yeah, just pick the entire differential up with one hand. Is it heavy? Yes, but I don't think it's, 110 pounds. So I don't know. Regardless, weight savings is weight savings, and you know, we won't have all of this up in the front end plus the inertial weight, as we had mentioned before. And of course the viscous clutch, which I'm assuming, like I said, is this portion here, that's fluid inertia. So, you know, we've got to spin that up as well at a very high rate of speed. I'll show you guys the CV shafts later, but you can see here the diff. It's definitely weeping a little bit. I mean, it's not, you know, it wasn't dripping. So this is like on a scale of 1 to 10 leak, it's probably about a 0.5, but you know, it is leaking nonetheless. And these seals here, actually this one on the other side is a little bit worse. Actually, this seal is probably the cause of this entire weepage right here. You can see kind of just up and around. It's a little bit wet there, but not bad overall. Pretty good shape for being, you know, 6-figure miles plus 22 years old. So not terrible overall. But the CV shafts are the things that are not in the greatest of shape, and I'll show you that now. All right, now you can see here we got all sorts of real estate here to work with. Here's our very funny shaped fuel tank. They had to kind of do this really interesting shape thanks to the front differential. But this right here is why the Carrera 4s have very crappy fuel capacity compared to the 2s, because all of this fuel volume is taken up by the front differential. But anyway, you can see here, you see this grease here. It's like that on either side. I ruined a set of gloves earlier because I was reaching up in here getting these bolts out, and they're now grease logged, so that's cool. But both boots on both CV shafts were dripping, so you know, like I said, definitely time to go. Probably wasn't long before these were gonna just completely explode. But you can see what I mean here. These have a pretty convex portion here, and it was hard to get up and around the concave portion of the differential there. The rear mount for the differential also holds in place the mount for these coolant tubes here. You're gonna have to disconnect that from the diff so that we can put the brace back in place, because as you can see, without that, these can move a little bit. Aside from that, we got to take the CV joints out now. Well, good news, everyone. These just came right out. Fortunately, these axles are not interference fit like the rear ones are. You actually need a specific axle removal tool to get the rear ones out, because these splines interfere with the hub on the rear wheels. This is what I was talking about. This is the little encoder here for the wheel speed sensor. This part needs to remain with the car now that the axles are no longer needed, but we will need to disassemble the axle here and then leave this part with the hub. What remains to be seen is how easy it is to disassemble this CV joint. All right, everybody, just a quick update. I have done you all a favor and avoided some of the very boring details. A couple of the main things that I did: we disconnected the CV shafts. Those are here, and they are now hanging by the coolant tube. Sorry, that was the worst camera angle. Here's the CV shafts on either side, hanging by the coolant tubes by zip ties up there to keep them up and out of the way. I removed the slave cylinder. That was one thing I forgot to mention earlier that we would have to do. That is located up at the top here on the driver's side of the car. Two 13mm bolts that hold that in. It's kind of a pain because it's a very blind situation up in there, but you know, as long as you've got enough light, you can figure it out. We also went ahead and drained the transmission, because obviously we're going to be opening this transmission up once we have it on the bench, and I don't want to be opening it when it's full, and draining it out of the car is probably going to be somewhat of a pain. Additionally, I've gone ahead and taken out literally every single bolt except for this one right here. And what I like to do is I make this little organizer. This is the shape of the transmission bell housing, as you can see. And so I place the bolts accordingly, because as you can see, they are all different lengths, different sizes. So as you can see, we've just got the one bolt remaining. So the game plan here, because I don't have a transmission jack that goes up this high, I'm actually going to lower the car pretty close to the ground, just a couple feet off the ground rather, use my table over there to actually eventually support the engine. Because remember, like I said, once we remove this transmission and this mount, there's nothing on the front end of the car holding the engine up, only the rear two mounts, so the engine can swing down. So naturally, we need to support it from the moment we disconnect anything supporting the transmission. All right, I'm gonna shut up now and we're gonna go ahead and get started. Well, here it is. I sort of screwed the pooch, and you know, I started this time lapse of taking this out of the car, and it ended up fighting me quite a bit and giving me all sorts of trouble. And it was a time lapse of just me under there humping around and wiggling the transmission. Anyway, I finally got it loose after, you know, making sure that the engine and transmission were at the right angle to be happy with one another. And here it sits in the workshop where we are going to be doing all of the work of replacing the second gear synchros and maybe more. Anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it done for today. To recap, we have the bumper off, so we're ready to do the radiators. We have the front differential and CV shafts out, and we have the transmission out. So that sets us up nicely for doing every single one of the projects. We're going to start next with disassembling the transmission in the back. We'll get that apart, see what we need, what parts we need. We'll have parts on order. While we're waiting on parts, we're going to go ahead and do the radiators in the front, get that all finished up, and then hopefully have parts, put the transmission back together, put it back up in the car, and ship it. Please do me a huge favor and like this video. It helps out the channel a lot. Also, subscribe if you want to see us take apart this transmission in an upcoming video. Thank you so much for tuning in to FunAhead TV, and I will see you guys next time.